They say a dog's nose knows the truth, a truth that lies deeper than words or explanations. I never understood how profound that was until the night my partner, Kaiser, smelled death in a place built for healing. It was 2:17 a.m. at Oak Creek Medical Center, and the emergency room was wrapped in a rare, heavy silence. The only sounds were the hollow hum of medical machinery and the occasional buzz from the flickering fluorescent lights overhead. We weren't there on a case, not really. I just finished a welfare check on a frightened child, and Kaiser, my 4-year-old German Shepherd, had been the one to coax him out from under a bed. We were just waiting in an empty trauma bay for the paperwork to clear, the air thick with the ghost of bleach and old sorrows. I sat on a stool, exhausted, while Kaiser did what he always did. He worked the room. His nose was a low-flying satellite, mapping every scent. He swept past the gurney, sniffed at a crash cart, and then he stopped. He stood dead still before a row of locked stainless steel drawers. Then came the sound that broke the silence. Not a whine, but a scratch. Scrape, scrape, scrape. His claw rasped against the metal with a deliberate, insistent rhythm. He wasn't restless. He was reporting. His body was rigid, his tail frozen midair, his entire being focused on a small silver handle. I knew that posture. It wasn't a plea for a treat or a toy. It was the alert he was trained for, the one that meant he'd found something that should not be there. "Hey," I called out to a passing nurse. "Any idea what's in that drawer?" She barely glanced over, her face a mask of fatigue. "That? It's just an old backup kit, officer. It's been empty for ages." But Kaiser wasn't buying it. His scratching grew more frantic. My heart began to pound a slow, heavy drumbeat against my ribs. "My dog is a certified narcotics canine," I said, my voice now firm. "And he is clearly alerting. I need you to open that drawer. Now!" With a put-upon sigh, she fumbled for her keys and unlocked it. The drawer slid open with a metallic groan. Inside, it wasn't empty. It held a neat row of anesthesia vials, some half full and crudely recapped, one cloudy with a cracked lid, all of them screaming a silent, deadly secret. The nurse beside me let out a choked gasp, stumbling back as if the drawer had sent an electric shock up her arm. Her fatigue was gone, replaced by a stark, cold fear. In that moment, we both understood. This wasn't a storage mistake or old inventory. This was a crime scene. The stale, recycled air of the ER suddenly felt heavy, suffocating. My mind raced past the obvious charge of drug tampering to a much darker place. This wasn't just about stolen narcotics. It was about what was being left behind in those vials. Within the hour, the quiet hospital wing was buzzing with a new kind of energy. I made the call to my sergeant, and just like that, the case was mine. The weight of it settled on me, as tangible as the duty belt on my hips. This investigation began not with a chase or a raid, but in the sterile silence of the hospital's records room, with Kaiser sleeping at my feet, his job for the moment done. Hours blurred into a haze of burnt coffee and glowing screens as I dug through the last 90 days of patient files. I was looking for anomalies, for whispers in the data that no one had listened to. And then I found them. Not whispers, but screams. Eleanor Vance, 56, died from cardiac complications after a routine hernia repair. Robert Miller, a 32-year-old man, suffered a fatal respiratory collapse following minor orthopedic surgery. Then there was David Chen, 47, gone in 30 minutes from an unexplained event. Different doctors, different surgical teams, but one horrifying thread connected them all. Each had died shortly after being administered anesthesia. The grim hypothesis formed in my mind, cold and sharp as a scalpel. Someone was diluting the life-saving medication, rendering it ineffective, even deadly. They were pocketing the pure, potent drugs to sell or use, and leaving behind a trail of bodies disguised as surgical risks. The circle of access to that specific backup cabinet was small. Only 3 keys were assigned to it. 2 belonged to senior staff with impeccable records and solid alibis. The 3rd belonged to a junior nurse named Clara Jennings. I remembered her from my shifts. Quiet, always seemed to be avoiding eye contact, a nervous energy humming around her like a trapped bird. She was the weak link. I found her in a small break room, her hands trembling as she stirred a cup of tea. There was no need for a dramatic interrogation. I sat down across from her and spoke quietly, laying out the facts. The drawer, the tampered vials, the deaths. Her composure shattered like fine glass. "I just moved the boxes," she sobbed, her words tumbling out in a torrent of fear and regret. "That's all. I was paid to take them from the main supply to that cabinet. I never looked inside. They told me not to ask questions." They. The word hung in the air between us. I had my first confession, but I didn't feel a sense of victory. I looked at this terrified young woman, and I knew I was only looking at a pawn. This wasn't the end of the line. It was just the first thread of a web that stretched much deeper into the heart of this hospital. Clara Jennings gave us nothing more. She was a terrified pawn, too scared of the people who paid her to even whisper a name. My official investigation hit a wall of silence and feigned incompetence. The security footage from the hallway near the trauma bay. A technical glitch had corrupted 2 hours of video right around the time the drugs were likely swapped. Every official channel I pursued felt like pushing against a locked door. But a good investigator knows that when the front door is barred, you start checking the windows. The break in the case didn't come from a database or a formal interview, but from a quiet whisper in a deserted hallway. Her name was Maria, a night shift janitor who had worked at Oak Creek for 15 years. She approached me hesitantly near the cafeteria, her hands twisting the hem of her uniform. "Officer," she began, her voice low, "I don't know if it's anything, but I saw someone last week, after you started asking questions." She told me she'd seen a figure in scrubs, couldn't see a face, coming out of that trauma bay wing late at night. The person wasn't carrying a purse or a lunchbox, but a black, heavy-looking gym duffel bag. They didn't go to the parking lot. They went straight to the staff locker rooms near the west exit. It was the lead I needed. That afternoon, I brought Kaiser to the designated locker room. The air was thick with the smell of bleach and stale coffee. "Search," I commanded softly. Kaiser moved with the fluid grace of a creature born for this work. He wove between the benches, his nose hovering just above the floor, ignoring the sense of old food and sweat. Then he stopped. He sat squarely in front of a tall, gray locker, number 212, and looked back at me. It was his final, unshakable indication. With hospital security providing the master key, we opened the door. And there it was, a black duffel bag, half crushed in the back. My heart hammered against my ribs as I pulled on a pair of latex gloves and unzipped it. Inside lay a graveyard of empty anesthesia vials, some shattered, along with a pair of disposable gloves stained with something faintly red. Beneath it all was the prize, a prepaid burner phone. As if on cue, the screen lit up with a new message: "Need new batch by Thursday, payment waiting." This was bigger than a few stolen drugs. This was a distribution network. I immediately called in my colleague from narcotics, Detective Ben Carter. While he began work on the phone's data, I had our IT tech, Sam, cross-reference the locker room's electronic access logs with employee schedules. A single name lit up: Nurse Leo Vance. He wasn't on the list of key holders for the original cabinet, but he had accessed this locker room minutes after Maria's sighting. He was careful, but not careful enough. I found Leo Vance on his shift the next evening. He was calm, efficient, almost robotic in his precision. I watched him for an hour before approaching during a lull. "Mind if I ask what's in the pouch on your belt?" I asked casually, pointing to a non-standard kit he carried. For a split second, a flicker of pure panic crossed his eyes before being replaced by a mask of professional indifference. He handed it over. Inside a secondary, zipped pocket were 2 tampered vials, half drained and recapped. He didn't fight or cry like Claire had. He just stared, his face pale, as I quietly read him his rights. We had another link in the chain, and this one felt cold, hard, and much closer to the source. Of course, this next section is the story's climax, building directly on the arrest of Leo Vance. To do these crucial scenes justice and maintain a powerful pace without feeling rushed, this passage is slightly longer at approximately 600 words, as it covers the entire sequence from the stakeout to the final confrontation, as detailed in Part 4 of our outline. Leo Vance was a cold, hard wall. Unlike the terrified Clara Jennings, he knew his rights and immediately demanded a lawyer, saying nothing. But he didn't have to. The burner phone he carried spoke volumes. My partner, Detective Ben Carter, dove into its digital soul and found the heart of the operation. The data pointed overwhelmingly to a single location, the Northwood Pain Clinic, a shady establishment on the other side of town with a reputation for writing scripts for anyone with cash. Our problem at Oak Creek wasn't just an internal infection. It was a symptom of a much larger disease, and we had just found its source. 2 nights later, I was parked across the street from the clinic, the engine off, the darkness inside my cruiser thick with anticipation. Kaiser sat beside me in the passenger seat, not sleeping, but staring intently at the clinic's side door, a low growl occasionally rumbling in his chest. At 10:06 p.m., the door opened. 2 men emerged, neither in medical scrubs. They moved with a hurried, furtive energy, unlocking a beat-up white van and hoisting a heavy, medium-sized cooler into the back. "That's our signal," I whispered, keying my radio to alert Ben and his backup unit. I stepped out of the car, my hand on my weapon. "Police! Step away from the vehicle!" One of them, a man in a black jacket, bolted. He ran hard, but he was no match for my partner. "Go, Kaiser!" I commanded, releasing his leash. The shepherd exploded from my side, a blur of focused muscle. He didn't bark. He just ran. He tackled the suspect with the force of a linebacker, a clean, precise takedown that pinned the man to the asphalt without causing serious injury. By the time I reached them, backup had the other man in cuffs. Inside the van were not one, but 10 coolers, filled with stolen vials of anesthesia and fentanyl, all bound for the street. Back at the station, the 2 couriers folded quickly. They were low-level movers, paid in cash by a man they never met. A man they only knew by his encrypted handle, the Doc. As Ben relayed the name, the final pieces of the puzzle slammed into place in my mind with brutal clarity. I remembered the internal memo from months ago about a recalled batch of anesthesia that had supposedly been destroyed. I remembered the inventory logs for that disposed batch and the one signature that appeared on every page. And Ben provided the final, damning piece of evidence, a plane ticket to Detroit, a known distribution hub, booked last month on a credit card tied to a shell company that owned the Northwood Clinic. The card was in the name of Dr. Alistair Finch. Our doc wasn't some shadowy figure in another city. He was Oak Creek's chief of anesthesiology. I couldn't wait for a warrant. The next day, I found Finch covering a last-minute shift in OR3. I watched him through the window in the door, my own phone discreetly recording. I saw him prep his tray, and then I saw it. He slipped a small, unlabeled vial from his coat pocket. He was going to do it again. I pushed through the door. "Step away from the patient, doctor." His face, a mask of calm authority, barely flickered. "Officer, this is a sterile environment." "So is that vial from hospital inventory?" I asked, stepping closer. "Or your own private stock?" He moved then, not at me, but to the Sharps disposal bin, trying to discard the syringe. I was faster. I slammed him against the prep table as Kaiser let out a single, deafening bark that alerted the entire wing. As I secured his wrist behind his back, the pristine, respected doctor's facade finally crumbled, revealing the monster underneath. The kingpin of the operation was in handcuffs. Dr. Finch's arrest didn't silence the hospital. It shattered the quiet corruption he had cultivated for years. The news broke like a fever, and suddenly everyone had a story, a suspicion, a close call they now saw in a horrifying new light. The DEA stepped in, taking the threads Ben and I had uncovered and weaving them into a vast tapestry of a national trafficking ring. Finch himself, arrogant to the end, remained silent. But it didn't matter. The evidence, starting with a simple scratch on a drawer, was enough to ensure he would never practice medicine or see freedom again. My role in the criminal case was ending, but my duty felt incomplete. 2 weeks later, I found myself on a quiet suburban street, standing on the front porch of a small brick house. I wasn't there in my uniform. I was there as Eva. When the door opened, I faced the sister of Eleanor Vance, the 56-year-old woman who had died after her hernia repair. I had rehearsed a dozen things to say, but in the end, I just spoke the truth. I didn't come to explain the investigation, I said gently. I just came to say that I'm sorry for your loss, and to tell you that your sister didn't die from a complication. She died because of a crime, and the man responsible has been arrested. Tears welled in her eyes, tears not of fresh grief, but of sad, weary validation. I knew it, she whispered. I knew something was wrong. She knelt down and stroked Kaiser's head, her fingers sinking into his thick fur as if he were an anchor in her storm. Thank you, she said, looking not at me, but at my stoic, gentle partner. Thank you both. A month later, Kaiser and I stood on a stage at a community center, receiving a plaque for outstanding service. The applause was warm, but the real reward wasn't the polished wood in my hands. It was the quiet that followed. That evening, as the sun set, I sat with Kaiser on a bench overlooking the town. Justice, I'd learned, wasn't always a thunderclap in a courtroom. Sometimes it's a persistent scratch in a silent room. It's the courage of a witness to speak up. And sometimes it's the profound, unspoken trust between a person and their dog. Kaiser nudged my hand, his work done, and I knew we were finally home. The story of Officer Eva Rostova and her canine, Kaiser, is more than a thrilling tale of crime and justice. It is a profound reflection on the wisdom we gather throughout our lives. It teaches us that life's most significant truths often begin not with a roar, but with a whisper, a scratch on a locked drawer, a detail that seems out of place, a subtle shift in the atmosphere that only experience can detect. In our daily lives, it is easy to dismiss these small signals. We are often encouraged to ignore the minor inconsistencies, to not make a scene, just as the first nurse dismissed Kaiser's warning. Yet the story champions the quiet courage of paying attention. It validates that nagging feeling in our gut that tells us something isn't right. This is a reminder that integrity is not always about grand, heroic gestures, but about the simple, steadfast choice to ask one more question, to listen closely, and to act on what we know to be true, even when it is inconvenient. Furthermore, the narrative celebrates the deep wisdom of trust, not just in a loyal companion like Kaiser, but in the steadfast voice of our own intuition, a companion honed over decades of living. The bond between Eva and Kaiser is a powerful metaphor for this relationship with our own inner conscience. It urges us to honor the instincts that have guided us, for they are built upon a foundation of countless past observations and experiences. Ultimately, the most resonant lesson is one of attentiveness. By remaining observant of the world around us, by listening to the quiet truths spoken by those we trust, and by honoring the unwavering voice of our own experience, we do more than just solve problems. We live with purpose, protect those we love, and affirm the simple, powerful truth that wisdom and courage are the true guardians of our world.